What if I told you that your entire life is being controlled by a script you never wrote? A script filled with self-doubt, limitations, and unconscious patterns that you've been repeating every single day. Think about it. 95% of your thoughts today are the same as yesterday. That means, unless you break the cycle, tomorrow will be no different. No growth, no change, just the same old life on repeat. Let me introduce you to Jack. A guy just like you, stuck in a cycle of negative self-talk. Every morning he looked in the mirror and thought, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, nothing ever works out for me. And guess what? His life reflected exactly that. But then something changed. He started talking to himself differently, and in just 3 days, everything in his life began to shift. As Marcus Aurelius once said, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. So here's the challenge. For the next 3 days, talk to yourself in a new way and watch how your entire reality transforms. Are you ready? Let's begin. Day 1. Awareness, breaking limiting beliefs. Jack stared at the email, his vision blurring as he reread the words. We regret to inform you that you have not been selected for this position. His fingers hovered over the mouse, unable to click away. The rejection hit harder than he expected. It wasn't just about this one job. It was about every failure before it. Every time life had told him, you're not good enough. A familiar weight pressed against his chest. His breath came in shallow bursts, his mind racing through every past disappointment, every missed opportunity, every moment of invisibility. He wasn't just failing to get a job, he was failing as a person. He exhaled sharply and pushed himself away from the desk. The room felt smaller, suffocating. He needed air. Stumbling into the bathroom, he turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on his face. When he looked up, his own reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, a man who had spent too many years trapped inside his own mind. Why do I do this to myself? He whispered. The silence in the room swallowed his words. He studied his reflection, waiting for an answer. And then a voice surfaced in his head, quiet but firm. Because this is who you are. His stomach clenched. He wanted to argue, but the words felt true. He had spent years reinforcing this identity, brick by brick, failure by failure, building the prison of his own self-doubt. And now he couldn't imagine himself outside of it. Then another thought surfaced, not as an epiphany, but as a whisper breaking through the storm. What if this isn't the truth? What if I've just been telling myself the same story for too long? Jack's breath hitched. If the pain he felt now wasn't from the rejection itself, but from the meaning he had attached to it, then everything he believed about himself might be a lie. That realization didn't bring relief, it brought fear. Because if he had spent years constructing this identity, what was he without it? A thought from Epictetus surfaced in his mind. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He had dismissed it before, convinced that success belonged to others, not him. But now, as he stared at the rejection email, he saw it differently. It was just words on a screen. It held no inherent meaning, except for the one he had chosen to give it. Maybe the real battle wasn't against rejection. Maybe it wasn't against the world. Maybe it was against the voice inside him, the one that had decided long ago that he wasn't good enough. But if he could decide that once, maybe, just maybe, he could decide something different. Jack's brain had been trained for years to see rejection as proof of his inadequacy. But what if he had been reinforcing the wrong beliefs all along? He took a deep breath and reached for a notebook. He wrote down the first thought that surfaced. I am not good enough. The words felt heavy, suffocating. He wrote another. I always fail. Then another. I will never be successful. He stared at them. If someone else had said these words to him, he would have fought back. He would have defended himself. But because they had come from his own mind, he had accepted them without question. His fingers trembled as he drew a line down the center of the page. On the right side, he forced himself to write something different. I am capable of learning. Failure is part of success. I am improving every day. He scoffed. The new words felt hollow, like a forced lie. But maybe that was because his brain wasn't used to hearing them. He had spent years repeating the same negative beliefs. He couldn't expect his mind to accept new ones overnight. Jack leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting to a childhood memory. He was 10 years old, standing on a soccer field, heart pounding as the coach called for volunteers. He had wanted to step forward, but then he heard the voice in his head. You're not good at sports. A teacher had said it once, and from that moment on, he had made sure it was true. He had held himself back, avoided games, stayed in the background. It wasn't that he couldn't be good at sports. It was that he had convinced himself he wasn't. His entire life had been dictated by a script he hadn't even written. Jack sat up straighter. He couldn't change everything in a day, but he could start with this, his self-talk. The next morning, Jack woke up feeling the weight of yesterday still clinging to him. The email replayed in his mind like a broken record, rejected, again. His instinct was to grab his phone, to lose himself in distractions. But he hesitated. That's not who I am anymore. He sat up, inhaled deeply, and walked to the mirror. His reflection was the same tired eyes, same hesitant expression, but today he wasn't going to look away. He squared his shoulders and forced the words out. Today I choose my thoughts. The phrase felt unnatural, like wearing a shirt that didn't fit. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time, as if trying to convince himself. Today, I choose my thoughts. Something shifted inside him. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was resistance, a refusal to let the same old voice control his day. He wasn't going to work. He didn't have a job. But he had something just as important to do: change his approach to life. For months he had been applying to jobs mindlessly, sending applications without real effort, expecting rejection before he even clicked submit. But today he was going to do it differently. He was going to challenge himself, not just with what he did, but with how he spoke to himself while doing it. As he opened his laptop, the first challenge came almost immediately. A job listing caught his eye, something he had the skills for, but a familiar voice crept in. You're not qualified enough. Jack froze. That belief had always been there. But today, he caught it. Was it true? He had experience. He had learned new skills. The only thing standing between him and applying was his own doubt. He took a deep breath. I am capable. The words felt awkward, but he said them anyway. And then he applied. Throughout the day, the voice fought back. When he struggled with a cover letter, it whispered, "You always mess this up." His stomach clenched. The old him would have stopped. But today he countered, "I am improving," and he kept writing. By the time night fell, Jack had done something different. He hadn't just applied to jobs. He had changed the way he spoke to himself while doing it. Sitting at his desk, he opened his notebook again. He reread the words from last night. I am capable. I am learning. I am changing. Yesterday, those words had felt like a lie. Tonight, they felt possible. Before turning off the lights, he stood in front of the mirror one last time. His reflection was the same, but something in his eyes looked different. I am not controlled by my thoughts. I control them. And for the first time, he almost believed it. Day 2. Reprogram your self-talk. Jack woke up with a dull ache in his chest. The weight of yesterday still clung to him. He had challenged his thoughts, tried to fight back against the narrative that had controlled him for years, but waking up this morning, it felt like nothing had changed. The rejection email was still real. He was still unemployed. And despite his efforts, the old voice inside his head was waiting for him. You can say all the affirmations you want, but at the end of the day, you're still a failure. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. The battle wasn't over, far from it. Yesterday had been about awareness, about seeing the patterns that had dictated his life. Today, the real work began. Today, he had to change the way he spoke to himself, even when every part of him resisted. He dragged himself out of bed and stood in front of the mirror. His reflection felt like an opponent, daring him to repeat the words from yesterday. Today, I choose my thoughts. His voice was flat, unconvincing. You don't believe that? He clenched his fists. Did belief even matter, or was it the repetition that counted? Maybe he didn't need to believe it yet. Maybe he just needed to keep saying it until his mind had no choice but to listen. Today, I choose my thoughts. He said it again, louder. The voice in his head pushed back, but Jack didn't stop. He had listened to his self-doubt for years, and where had it gotten him? He had nothing to lose by trying something different. Later that morning, he forced himself to open his laptop. Job applications. The very thought made his stomach churn. He had sent out dozens already, and all he had received in return was silence or rejection. Why bother? No one wants you. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He could feel himself slipping, falling into the same cycle. But then he caught it. No, that's not true. Wasn't it? The evidence suggested otherwise. But then again, wasn't that just another story he had been telling himself? Jack closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. He thought about something Marcus Aurelius had written. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The rejection email had been an outside event. He couldn't change it, but he could change how he responded to it. He took another breath and forced himself to apply to the first job he found. His hands trembled as he typed out the cover letter. Every instinct screamed at him to stop. You're wasting your time. You'll just get rejected again. But this time, instead of letting that thought dictate his actions, he countered it. I am improving. Every application I send makes me stronger. The words didn't feel entirely true, but he typed them anyway, whispering them under his breath. When he clicked submit, he felt different, not excited, not confident, but he felt like he had won, just a little. Not against the job market, not against the companies rejecting him, against himself. By the afternoon, Jack had sent out 3 more applications. The process was agonizing. Every time he hit send, he felt like he was setting himself up for disappointment. But he was learning to separate the outcome from the effort. He took a break, stepping outside for fresh air. The world moved around him as if nothing had changed, but inside, something was shifting. As he sat on a park bench, his phone buzzed. A notification, a new rejection email. His stomach dropped. "See, I told you. It doesn't matter how much you change your self-talk. The world doesn't care." Jack gritted his teeth. He could feel the pull, the urge to let this moment reinforce his old identity, to let it confirm every doubt, every fear. But this time, he didn't immediately collapse under it. Pause. Instead of reacting, he took a deep breath. What if he didn't let this define him? What if this email didn't mean what he thought it meant? Rejections were normal. Even the most successful people had faced them. If he gave up now, he was guaranteeing failure. But if he kept going, if he learned to detach himself from external outcomes, then maybe, just maybe, he could win. "This rejection does not define me." The words felt foreign, but he held on to them. "This is a lesson, not a judgment of my worth." He stared at the email for another moment, then closed it. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he had lost. That evening, Jack did something he had never done before. He recorded himself. Sitting at his desk, he opened his phone's camera, staring at his own face. His stomach twisted. "This is stupid." But he hit record anyway. "I've spent years talking to myself like I'm my worst enemy," he said, his voice hesitant. "And I've never questioned it. I've just accepted it as the truth. But today, I challenged it. Today, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I've been wrong about myself." He paused. The words felt too big, too heavy. But he continued, "I still don't believe it fully, but I think I will if I keep doing this, if I keep talking to myself like I deserve a chance, because I do, and I don't need anyone else to believe it first. I just need to start believing it myself." He hit stop. The video stared back at him. He wanted to delete it, but he didn't. Instead, he saved it. Tomorrow, he would record another. That night, Jack sat at his desk, notebook open. Yesterday he had written, "I am capable, I am learning, I am changing." Today he added something new, "My words shape my reality." He said them out loud, once, twice, again and again, until his mind had no choice but to listen. Before turning out the lights, he walked to the mirror. His reflection was the same, but he was starting to feel different. "I am in control of my words. I am in control of my emotions." And this time, it didn't feel like a lie. Can you do what Jack did? Day 2 was a test of resilience, not against the world, but against the voice inside Jack's mind. It was the voice that had dictated his life for years, convincing him that failure defined him, that rejection meant he wasn't good enough, and that no matter how hard he tried, he would never change. But today Jack fought back. The moment he woke up, the old doubts were waiting. "You're still the same. Nothing has changed." But instead of surrendering, he spoke back. "Today, I choose my thoughts." The words felt forced, almost like a lie, but he repeated them anyway. When he opened his laptop, another battle began. Job applications, his personal battlefield of rejection. The familiar fear whispered, "Why bother? You'll just get another no." But instead of retreating, Jack challenged the thought. Was it a fact or just a habit? He typed his application, forced himself to silence the negativity, and hit submit. He didn't feel confident, but he felt in control. Then came the real test, a rejection email. The Jack from 2 days ago would have taken it as proof of his worthlessness, but today he paused. "This does not define me." The words felt unnatural, but they gave him power. He closed the email without letting it shatter him. That evening, he did something even more uncomfortable. He recorded himself. Staring into the camera, he admitted his struggles, but also made a promise. "I'm learning to speak to myself like I deserve a chance." He didn't delete the video. He saved it. Tomorrow, he would record another. This was Jack's day too. Now the question is, can you do what Jack did? Write down your most toxic thoughts, then rewrite them with a stronger truth. Record a short video of yourself speaking positively. Watch it tomorrow. Detach from outcomes. Focus on effort instead. Before you sleep, say, "I am in control of my words. I am in control of my emotions." Comment, "I am in control," if you're ready. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. Speaking to himself differently was a battle he had to fight every single day, not just once. Rewriting old beliefs takes time, effort, and relentless repetition. Day 2 had shown him that words had power. But what if he could take it further? What if he could rewire his entire mind, reshape his reality, not just with words, but with action? Tomorrow, he wouldn't just talk differently. He would think, act, and make decisions as the person he wanted to become. Day 3. Reprogram your mind for long-term success. Jack woke up before his alarm. Something was different. Not in the world, not in his circumstances, but inside him. The past 2 days had been about confronting his inner dialogue, about recognizing how much his thoughts had shaped his reality. But today, something clicked. Today was no longer about just talking to himself differently. Today was about proving to himself that he could act differently. He stood in front of the mirror as he had the past 2 mornings. But instead of hesitating, instead of forcing the words out, they came naturally. "I am already the person I want to become." For the first time, they didn't feel like a lie. It wasn't because he had suddenly fixed everything. He was still unemployed. He still had doubts. But something had shifted. He had spent years waiting for his thoughts to change before taking action. Now he was acting first, knowing his thoughts would eventually follow. The old version of himself had lived by a dangerous rule. If I don't feel confident, I won't act confident. But now Jack realized that was backward. Action creates confidence, not the other way around. He sat at his desk, staring at a list of companies. The old Jack would have hesitated, waiting for the perfect mood, the perfect words, the perfect moment. But now he knew the truth. There was no perfect moment. The only moment he ever had was this one. So he acted. Not because he felt ready, but because he was done waiting to feel ready. With a deep breath, he picked up his phone and dialed a number. His heart pounded, but he ignored it. "Hi, I wanted to follow up on my application." The words felt unnatural, but he said them anyway. The person who succeeds is the one who is willing to feel uncomfortable and take action despite it. The receptionist transferred him to a hiring manager. Jack straightened in his chair. He had spent years thinking he needed permission to be confident, waiting for an external force to validate him. But confidence wasn't something given. It was something taken. He cleared his throat. "I'd love to hear your feedback on my application. I know I can bring value to your team." It didn't matter what the response was. The victory had already happened. He had acted in alignment with his new identity. That night, Jack sat in front of the mirror again. This time, he didn't just repeat words. He studied himself, the way he stood, the way he carried himself, the way his own voice sounded when he spoke. For years, he had thought confidence was something he had to earn. But confidence wasn't a reward. It was a decision. He took a deep breath and a thought surfaced, not as a forced affirmation, but as a realization. I am no longer waiting to be someone else. I am already that person. It wasn't about changing overnight. It wasn't about eliminating fear. It was about acting despite fear, again and again, until the fear no longer mattered. He realized that he didn't have to wait to feel confident to take action. If he had waited until he felt ready, he never would have done anything. He finally understood that fear wasn't a signal to stop. It was a signal to move forward. Every time he felt discomfort, it wasn't proof that he should retreat, but proof that he was breaking out of his old patterns. He wasn't waiting for his mindset to change before acting differently. He acted differently, and that changed his mindset. He stopped dwelling on past failures or worrying about the future. He focused on what he could do today. Jack stood taller than before. He had spent years trying to become someone new, never realizing that he was already that person. He just hadn't allowed himself to act like it. He wasn't trying to become confident anymore. He already was. The only difference was that today he had acted like it. His journey wasn't about 3 days. It wasn't about a temporary experiment in self-talk. This was about rewiring his mind for life. The question is, can you do the same? Are you willing to stop waiting for the right moment, the right feeling, the right circumstances? Can you decide right now that you are already the person you want to be? Comment, "I am in control," if you're ready to take action today. The transformation, Jack's life beyond the 3 days. Jack didn't wake up on the 4th day as a completely different person. He didn't suddenly land his dream job, nor did he wake up without fear or doubt. But something had changed, something fundamental. For the first time in his life, Jack was no longer waiting for external validation to believe in himself. He was no longer letting his past dictate his future. He still faced challenges, but he faced them differently. When he sat down to apply for jobs, the voice of doubt still whispered, but now he knew how to respond. Instead of avoiding rejection, he embraced it as part of the process. He applied not with desperation, but with a quiet certainty that his worth wasn't tied to whether or not a company accepted him. He was no longer placing his identity in the hands of others. He was taking full responsibility for it himself. Jack started noticing changes in his interactions with others as well. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke, the way he entered a room, it all shifted. He no longer looked down or second-guessed whether he belonged in a conversation. He wasn't trying to prove himself to anyone. He had nothing to prove. The simple act of changing his self-talk had changed the way the world perceived him. Jack realized that people treated him the way he treated himself. In the past, he had always approached conversations cautiously, assuming others saw him as inadequate. Now he carried himself with quiet confidence, not because he had something external to show for it, but because he had decided he was enough. The way you talk to yourself determines how others see you. The moment Jack stopped seeing himself as small, others stopped seeing him that way too. He learned that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you embody. He had once thought success was about talent or luck. Now he understood that success was about mindset. He didn't have to be the most qualified person in the room. He just had to be the one who refused to give up. The old Jack would have let every rejection feel like a personal failure. But he had internalized lesson: detach from external outcomes. He understood now that his job was to show up, put in the effort, and let go of what he couldn't control. Stoic philosophy taught him that suffering often comes not from reality itself, but from our perception of it. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Jack had spent years torturing himself over things that hadn't even happened. He had been rejected before, but the real suffering had come from the meaning he assigned to those rejections. Now he saw each rejection as a stepping stone rather than a dead end. He wasn't chasing immediate results. He was playing the long game. One of the biggest lessons Jack learned was that change doesn't happen overnight, but through consistent repetition. The affirmations he once scoffed at were no longer just words. They had become his reality. Repetition is more important than belief. At first, the statements he wrote in his notebook had felt forced, fake. But the more he repeated them, the more his brain began to accept them as truth. He wasn't pretending to be confident anymore. He was training his mind to think differently. The words he used to describe himself were shaping his actions. Words create reality. The moment he stopped saying, "I always fail," he stopped approaching situations as if failure was inevitable. The moment he told himself, "I am capable," he started taking actions that reflected that belief. This was exactly what Epictetus had meant when he said, "First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Jack was no longer wishing for a different life. He was acting as the person he wanted to become. A few weeks after his 3-day transformation, Jack watched the video he had recorded of himself on day 2. He barely recognized the person in it. The hesitation in his voice, the doubt in his eyes, he had moved beyond that. He was still the same person, but with an entirely different mindset. Track your progress. Change is often so gradual that we don't notice it while it's happening. But when Jack looked back at himself, he saw just how far he had come. This made him realize something profound. Most people underestimate how much they can change in a short period of time. Fear no longer stopped him. There was one final breakthrough that changed everything. Jack no longer waited to feel confident before taking action. He didn't let fear be his signal to stop. Fear is a signal to move forward, not stop. Every time he hesitated, every time he felt discomfort, he knew it was a sign that he was growing. He had once believed that fear meant he was doing something wrong. Now he understood that fear meant he was on the right path. He embraced discomfort as a necessary part of growth. He no longer needed permission to take up space. He no longer needed certainty to take action. Jack had spent years waiting for his mindset to change before acting differently. He didn't need to be fearless to take action. He just needed to act. The more he did, the more his self-perception shifted. Jack had spent years trapped in regret about the past and anxiety about the future. Instead of thinking about what had gone wrong before or what might go wrong in the future, he focused on what he could do right now. He could make a call. He could send an email. He could step forward instead of stepping back. And with each action, his future was reshaped. You are already that person. One day, as he was about to leave his apartment for a networking event, a place he would have once avoided, he paused at the mirror. He saw himself clearly, but he no longer looked for something missing. He didn't wait for confidence to appear. He simply said, "I am already the person I want to be." And this time, he didn't just believe it, he lived it. The challenge for you. Jack's transformation wasn't just about 3 days. It was about breaking the cycle of self-doubt, rewriting the story he had told himself for years, and finally realizing that confidence, success, and self-worth were never things he had to wait for. The question now is, can you do what Jack did? Stop waiting. Stop questioning. You already are the person you want to be. You just have to act like it. Jack's journey wasn't just about 3 days. It was about reclaiming control over his own mind. He proved that the way you speak to yourself shapes your reality. He learned that fear is not a stop sign, but a signal to move forward. He discovered that confidence isn't something you wait for. It's something you build, one action at a time. And through it all, Stoic philosophy was his guiding light. The Stoics understood something most people spend their whole lives ignoring. We suffer not from the events in our lives, but from our judgment about them. Those words from Epictetus hold the key to everything. Jack had spent years trapped in his own perception of failure, but the moment he changed the way he thought, everything around him began to change too. Now the question is, are you ready to take control? For 3 days, Jack rewrote his inner dialogue. Now it's your turn. Challenge yourself. Speak to yourself like someone who deserves success. Let Stoic wisdom guide you, and see for yourself what happens when you stop being your own worst enemy and start being your greatest ally. Comment, "I am in control" below if you're ready to take on this challenge. Like this video if you found value in Jack's journey. Subscribe for more Stoic lessons that will rewire your mind and change your life. This is just the beginning. The only thing standing between you and the life you want is the way you talk to yourself. What will you say next?